This is December the 13th, the first day of this December 2025 two-day sesshin. I see I have 3 clocks, so I will certainly try to keep within the reasonable time frame here. For the text of these 2 days, I'm using a book about Tangen Harada Roshi called Throw Yourself into the House of Buddha, the Life and Zen Teachings of Tangen Harada Roshi, translated by Belinda Attaway Yamakawa. So why choose Tangen? Tangen, for many, many reasons. Tangen was Roshi Kapleau's mentor when he was in Japan. He also went through the Second World War. I was born in the Second World War in the UK, and my first 4 years were spent in under that kind of wartime thing. So I have a real affinity with this man, and affinity is a very important thing when you're looking for teachers or life companions. It's the kind of warmth, the kind of intangible feeling you have about something that you're compatible with. We have it with pets, people going, for example, to a shelter to pick up an animal. Why is it this one? Why isn't it that one? And so it's true in Zen practice as well. You will have an affinity with different kinds of practices. And at different times in your training, you may move from one to the other. At one point, one-pointed concentration becomes the absolute need one has. At another time, it can be shikantaza, where you open up, where you are noticing, where you're very aware. It can also be just the breath, after all. Without the breath, we are not. And it is our absolute connection to the universe. So bear in mind that affinity goes with you. It goes with you in choosing partners as well. And sometimes we make mistakes, and we find the affinity that we thought was there has exhausted itself, which would be the best way to look at it. And we need to just keep moving on. The other thing about Tangen Roshi is his example. This is a man of deep compassion, very warm-hearted, grew, of course, his study of Zen was in the strictest of Zen temples, which was Daiyon Harada Roshi, Roshi Kapleau's first teacher. But Tangen, because of his initial awakening experience, was a man of great depth and warmth. So we'll share some of that feeling of this man and go from there. Daisetsu Tangen Harada Roshi, called Roshi-sama with respect and affection by his students, was born as Usao Abe in the city of Niigata on August the 24th, 1924. Narrowly surviving World War II, he was haunted by his war experience, human suffering, and the question of life and death. Tangen was only 17 when he went into the army. I think in Japan, all young men from the age of 17 to probably 30 were required to join the army. And he trained as a suicide pilot, a kamikaze. Those were the planes that, for many of you too young to remember, but the planes that bombed Pearl Harbor and brought America into the Second World War. He was the last one to go for this particular bombing run because he was the youngest. They saved him till last. And he was ready to go. He had drunk his last glass of sake, made his peace with his family, with whatever. And then an announcement came over the radio that Emperor Hirohito had declared an end to the war, and so he never went. But he ended up in a Soviet prison camp and would have died there, except one of the guards insisted that he drink with him some rather, I think, low-grade alcohol. Maybe it was potatoes, I'm not sure. But he got really, really sick. And so the next day he was supposed to leave with the rest of the prisoners, most of whom died then in the Gulag. But he had to stay behind. He was too sick to move. And so he survived. And these experiences of near death, but being absolutely sure you're going to die, were transformative for him in his search to know, what is this? Who am I? And so forth. He practiced under one of the most significant Zen masters of modern Japan, Daiun Sogaku Harada Roshi, and that was Philip Kaplow's teacher too, who ordained him and gave him the name Tangen. After intense training, his realization was confirmed, and he received Dharma transmission and Inka Shome at the age of 27. It's very young. He then served as personal attendant to Daiun Roshi for several years, leading practice at Hoshinji while living together with his teacher in a small hermitage. He became the abbot of the neighboring temple of Bukokuji at the request of his teacher. And Truman, I think you went to Bukokuji, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So many of our teachers and leaders here have spent time in Bukokuji, and one of our trainees, Shirley Helvey, I have to tell you a story about Shirley because she was the wife, 20 years younger than a very wealthy dentist in Madison. That's how I knew her. And she went to country clubs and was completely into the sort of living in the very high neighborhoods. And then her husband died. She came to Zen, and that was it. She came to Rochester, felt she needed to be more committed than she was here, and so off she went to Japan, and she went to Bukokuji with Tangen Roshi. She begged him to ordain her, but he kept refusing until finally he allowed her to become a priest. But it takes you in different ways. Tangen Roshi taught tirelessly. He gave countless teisho during sesshin, public Dharma talks, and formal tea on bath days. I guess they only have certain days to take baths in Japan, in the monastery. Unlike the customary Japanese teisho, which is traditionally a commentary on a classic text, most of Tangen Roshi's talks were not based on the Zen canon, but were spontaneous expressions of his realization, delivered without any preparation. And depending on the audience, the tone of his talks differed. For someone who never met Tangen Roshi, his talks may sound like they speak of a far-off, unreachable ideal. But the complementary part of those teachings was living with him and seeing that during practice, work, meals, drinking tea, or begging, he was living to the letter everything he was preaching. I pause here because for all of us in this Zendo or practicing Zen, this really matters, how you show up. How do you drink your tea? How do you address another? How do you make your bed even? I know how badly I do that, but it's this living example is when we are actualizing the Dharma. It's fine for us to struggle and strive for realization, but it's the actualization which is the real test. And so I think this is another reason to be so beholden to Tangen Roshi. When a young girl from the neighborhood came and asked him to perform a funeral for her dead rabbit, Tangen Roshi put on his best robes and conducted a beautiful full-length funeral service. When a senior monk wanted to check his understanding, Tangen Roshi would be ready to see him in Doksan at any time. When there was temple-related office work to do, Tangen Roshi would work late into the night alone, enabling his students to focus only on their practice. When one of his students would snooze during zazen, he would get up himself and use the kyosaku. He did so forcefully, but at the same time with deep compassion and kindness. When a kitten would lay on Tangen Roshi's cushion in the hondo before the start of morning chanting, he would spread his zago, that's his prayer mat, on bare tatami and let the kitten continue to sleep on his place through the chanting. Tangen Roshi saw a Buddha in everyone and everything. He treated those he encountered in this way without differentiating between big and small, important and non-important, enlightened and deluded. Yet at the same time, Tangen Roshi would tirelessly guide his students to what he himself had realized, demanding that they give their all to their practice just as he did. No matter if someone stayed at Bukokuji for 30 years or for just one day, everybody was struck by his living example of bodhisattva life. Then a little of his autobiography. I came into this world with a great debt. My mother gave her own life in order to give birth to me. She already had 3 children, and when she was pregnant with me, she was diagnosed with stomach cancer. The doctor urged her to apologize to the baby and to have the cancer removed from her stomach. Those around her, my father as well, tried to persuade her to do it, but she stood firm, vowing, "This baby in my belly is going to be born." I was born on August the 24th, the day we worship Jizo Bodhisattva. That's the Bodhisattva of children and travelers and the underworld. After that, it was too late for the surgery. Just before she died, she very clearly expressed herself to those close to her. "Even after I die, I will care for and protect this child." She must have prayed fiercely for my protection. She died before my first birthday and left me in the care of Jizo Bodhisattva. When I was still very young, when I came to understand what she had done for me, I wrote on a piece of paper, "My mother laid down her life for me. What does she mean for me to do with this gift?" And I continuously wondered what it was that I should do with this life. What was she telling me? Yet I was terribly dissatisfied as a child. I could not be calm. Of course, I was guided by the usual greed, anger, and ignorance. I was overtaken by want, creating seeds for pain. I lived immersed in this and that, dualistic thinking. It was a miserable childhood. And when I was about 12 years old, a deep questioning arose in me. Whenever I felt a touch of wind or looked up at the sky overhead, I would ask myself, what is there down deep beneath the surface of things? When I would eat an orange, for instance, I wouldn't think of its taste or color, but I would wonder, what is there? There is something I feel but don't understand. I sense its presence but can't take hold of it. And my inability to answer those questions was a source of such discontentment that I always felt separated from people and things. I think many people struggle with, his mother died and gave birth to him, and he had enormous gratitude to her. And I think even for those people or those of us whose mothers failed in their duty, either from mental illness, ignorance, whatever the circumstances, we can still be grateful for that life. that we were given, an opportunity to be this one unique being. We don't appear twice, even twins, they're not the same. So each one of us is a unique being that shows up in a particular moment in time. And so if we can be grateful, we don't have to forgive the suffering, but we can at least maybe be grateful. Because of Tangen's big questioning about what was his worth, how could he doing, he resolved to be like a chair. I was still young when I vowed to myself that I would always do what really needed to be done, that I would pour myself into whatever was before me to do. At about 16-year-old, I became driven to really question myself. Who is the most good-for-nothing person around, the weakest, the laziest, the most useless one? And I knew deep in my heart that it was I. I beat myself up over this. I couldn't stand myself for thinking ill of others. I couldn't stand it that I would dislike others. I saw myself as pitiful. At 17 years old, I had the good fortune to read a book called Inshitsu Roku by En Ryobon, a noted scholar from the Ming Dynasty. This is a book of instruction the author compiled for his son, Tenkei. The term means to be decided without one's being aware of it. That is to say that the fortunes that befall a person, sunshine and shadow, ups and downs, are naturally determined without his knowing it by his own past actions and by his environment. This is karma, really. Upon carefully reading this book, it became clear to me that there is a path to be followed, and I resolved then to follow it. From childhood on, I had been in search of something and had always been a rather rebellious youth. I kept thinking that I had never really been given the opportunity to understand the reason for living. I did not much care for Buddhist priests. I had the idea that they wore funny clothes, talked a lot of nonsense, and led lives of comfort and ease. But En Ryobon's book really addressed itself to that something I had been searching for, and it surprised me to realize that the lesson came through a Buddhist priest. Although Inshitsu Roku is at heart a Confucian text, it is a Zen master who clearly points the way. And incidentally, the man who translated the book into Japanese, Daiun Harada Roshi, was to become my Zen teacher 5 years later. I then resolved to become like a chair. A chair doesn't refuse its services to anybody. It just takes care of the sitter and lets them rest their legs. After it has served its purpose, no one gets up and gives thanks or offers words of kindness to the chair. It will more likely get kicked out of the way. It doesn't grumble or complain or bear a grudge, but just takes whatever is given. It doesn't plop itself down on top of the sitter, right? When there's a job to be done, it puts forth its energy without picking and choosing. I thought, wouldn't it be great to have such a heart? Wouldn't it be great to have such a heart? I wrote on a big sheet of paper, "Be like a chair," and every day I took note of how close I came. And even if a little dissatisfaction arose, I would regard that as a disgraceful state of mind. During the time I was following this practice, I went to climb Mount Kinpoku, a rather small mountain of the Jokoku Pass near the town of Yugawara. As I climbed that day, I could think of nothing but my own selfishness. Shedding tears, I repeatedly reflected and repented, thinking, I'm no good, as I made the 30-minute ascent on the mountain trail. There was a large stone statue on the flat crest of the mountain. If I saw it today, I might know what it is, but at that time I had no idea. I think perhaps this statue was of Shakyamuni Buddha. but in those days I knew nothing of Buddhism. And I began to chant in front of this statue. Through chanting, I must have entered into a purer state of mind. Then I crossed to the other side of the mountain, which formed a precipice. A valley had been gouged out below, and beyond the valley stretched the Pacific Ocean. To one side I could see the rolling hills of the Izu Peninsula. Transfixed by the mountain landscape, I was standing just on the edge of the cliff. There I was, asking for nothing. I wasn't thinking or analyzing. I was adding nothing. The wind began to gust up toward me from the valley below. I became enveloped by the wind, and I felt as if I were growing bigger and bigger. At that moment, I realized that I was supported by heaven and earth, by all things. I was being told, all things are becoming you, nurturing you. Looking at the mountain was me. The wide, wide valley became me. I realized then that whatever I heard, whatever I saw, everything is always and forever supporting me, caring for me. And happiness gushed from the depths of my belly. Joy was uncontainable. I began to shout my own name from the top of my lungs. My name rang out over the horizon over and over. I could not stay still. And it was with unsuppressed joy that I began to race back down the mountain. It could have been dangerous, but my steps were natural, my feet were sure. I sped down the mountain with such force. It was my body moving, but not my own body at the same time. I ran down to the town of Atami, where I boarded the train for home. But my world was changed. Everything now was so intensely intimate. Everything that I encountered was so profoundly close. I remember picking up a small stone beside the path and carefully holding it and turning it in my hands as I encouraged it to be strong and steady. Good, good. Then I laid it carefully back down in its place. A bright and changed world unfolded before me. For 1 or 2 months after that experience, everything, down to the pebbles, brilliantly glistened. I thought, it is an intimate, friendly life. I was filled with the knowledge of being together with all things, part of the same life. At the same time, I still knew nothing of Zazen, but the walls separating me from others had collapsed. My world had become somehow without discrimination, so I felt as if I could even chat with the chirping sparrows. Without any theoretical understanding and without being able to explain what had happened, I had tapped into the very joy of life. And I determined from then on that I would dedicate my life to repaying my gratitude. I mentioned this story of his first awakening because so many people in this room and have brief glimpses of this oneness. The trouble is it's just a glimpse, and then we come back to being in the separated world, and we want to go back to that, and we hold on to it. But Tangen didn't do Zazen, but he did do a life of questioning, a life of wondering. And so he was in essence prepared for this moment. But this was not his first experience, and it was not approved by his teacher until much later. Then the war began. We were told by the government that Japan was in real danger. We had to fight against enemies who were portrayed by military propaganda as if they were devils themselves. My perspective was severely limited. I had the sense that I must give my own life to protect those close to me, parents, siblings, teachers, friends, fellow countrymen. I was still bound, tied down by a false sense of place, attached to boundaries, to us versus them. I believed that there was an enemy, yet I didn't have a sense of wanting to kill or to save my own life. I just wanted to give my life to protect others. I volunteered to fly as a kamikaze pilot. My goal in life was already to be of service, so sparing my own life was not a factor for me. The test was really difficult, geared as it was for university graduates, but I was able to somehow pass. I was only 19, the youngest one in my company. And then he, as I said in the earlier intro, he just avoids... It was 5 days after my graduation, on August the 15th, that I was supposed to take my final flight. Other pilots went before me, giving their lives, and I waited my turn. Since I was the youngest, our commander was keeping me last in line. I had my last ritual sake cup. Just when I was on the verge of setting off, we heard the Emperor on the radio announcing the unconditional surrender of Japan and the end of the war. I couldn't believe my ears. I was devastated because I was not able to do anything to protect my country. Later we learned that we had been deceived by our leaders and that it was Japan who was the aggressor. I was shocked. All my comrades had given their lives, and here I was, still alive, but to what purpose? Nothing made sense to me. It was then that I tasted the bitter pain of living. I suffered the anguish of being alive when so many were dead. Japan surrendered on August the 15th. If the war had ended even 1 day later, I would have flown my final flight, and I wouldn't have been able to meet with the teachings of the Buddha Dharma in this lifetime. So in his pain and confusion after the war, he meets up with another teacher of Harada Roshi, a woman, Nagasawa Roshi, and she took him under her wing. She was very fierce, very fierce teacher, but she had a nunnery, and it was sesshin was her focus, and she allowed him to go to a sesshin there, and she introduced him to Harada Roshi. And it was then at Hoshinji where Roshi Kapleau met Tangen, and Tangen was his mentor, stayed up all night with him one night to keep him awake and help him out. And so we have this link. I'm going to read now from another chapter called, I think we have time for one more, The Illusion of Separate Self. How does it happen? How do we fail to see our essential nature? When we were babies, we had no sense of opposition. For a baby, everything is me. There is no division, no duality. When it is hungry, it eats. When it's sleepy, it sleeps. Is the baby awakened? Of course. The baby is not lost in a dream of separation, but its state is not yet complete. A baby is totally self-absorbed. It must steadily grow. Yet with growth, the child learns to live by the discriminating mind and develops a sense of I. With growth comes the growth of the intellect and self-grasping. The sense of self and separation increases as we learn language. Everything that is not me is other, opposition, duality. We come to perceive everything to be outside ourselves. I want what's over there. I want this. I want that. A child becomes smarter and smarter. A sharp mind and exacting intellect means a lot in this world. Being smart, you can get ahead. You can make a name for yourself. You can rise to a high position. Is that bad? It's not a question of good and bad. Some use their intellectual growth for good, and some don't. That depends on the aspiration and intention of the individual. But everyone falls into the trap of dividing reality into pieces. We simply learn to treat this little I idea as the host, as the center of the universe. We just can't help but to favor and indulge this self that we imagine to exist. But almost everyone, as they reach adulthood, carries inside them a sense of lack. Something is missing. One could call a sesshin, something is missing, sesshin, you know. We gave it a title. Something is not quite right. At first we try to satisfy our myriad desires to get rid of this sense of lack. Oh, if only I could have things my way, I would have no further complaints. But if you get one, you desire two. If you get two, you desire three. It's never enough. We cannot ultimately be satisfied by getting what we want. And yet some people spend all their lives thinking that gratifying desires is what being human is about. Then once we've been able to polish our special talents and strengths, been able to study and to learn, had jobs that we have given our all to, we have made our way in the world. We have looked at things from all angles, seeking to understand what it's all about. We can see how painful it can be to make our way in life. We have experienced the difficulty of human relationships. It should be easier, but somehow it just isn't. Those people who humor us, those whom we perceive to be of benefit to us, we like and favor and become attached to. On the other hand, there are those people who do not particularly recognize us, who overlook us or ignore us, who do not treat us as we would like to be treated, or that are just not the way we want them to be. Those people we regard to some degree or another as enemies, as those who are against us. We don't like them. They irritate us and get on our nerves. And then we try various ways of self-improvement, self-help. Help yourself to grow, take good care of yourself, and you'll be a happier person. That is the message. There are all sorts of examples of this way of thinking, and there's nothing wrong with it. But of course, the object of self-improvement is the imagined, limited self. We have tried to be kind and caring. Our intention is to be of service to others. Even so, we are still working from the standpoint of self. As long as we are attached to it, we cannot live in clarity, and dissatisfaction remains. The source of all this anguish is the sense of separation. We have this illusion of a separate self, and we mistake this shadow for the real thing. Thus we cannot possibly help but imagine separation. Our seeing is limited, and limits are what we see. While every human being is in fact reality itself, almost all of us live in such a way that we cast aside this precious life. Most people don't understand that they are turning their backs on life, and so they are blown this way and that by the winds of circumstance. Lost in discrimination, judgment, and confusion, one becomes resigned to this fate. How sad that almost everyone meets their death in this way. Just a brief one on this chapter called Zazen. How should we practice? What is the path? Zazen is the foundation of our practice, and we learn to do Zazen correctly, following guidance of the teacher, to settle the body, settle the breath, settle the mind. Essentially, body, breath, and mind are not separate, just one. But to explain it, we can divide it into parts. So for the body, check your posture. Make sure that you are properly positioned on your cushion. You know, this is just a lot to take in right now, so I think I'm just going to save that for tomorrow, and I'm going to go to taking refuge. On many occasions, like the precept ceremony, we start by taking refuge in the three treasures. We say, Namo Kie Butsu, Namo Kie Ho, Namo Kie So, meaning, I take refuge in Buddha, I take refuge in Dharma, I take refuge in Sangha. It is said in the Shobogenzo that the Buddhas and ancient teachers correctly transmitted this practice of reverently taking refuge in the three treasures. It is at the heart of Buddhism, and it's presented to us very clearly so that we can walk the way without getting lost. Some time ago, we had a dog here named Koro. Eventually, one autumn, he got sick, and he was lying before the temple gate in the only bit of sun that shines here at this time of year. I just happened to be seeing a guest off at the gate, and I found Koro lying there. I checked and realized that he had stopped breathing. I held him in my arms on my lap and chanted the 3 refuges, Namu Kie Butsu, Namu Kie Ho, Namu Kie So. And Koro, who had stopped breathing, opened his mouth after I finished chanting the 3 refuges and howled. He answered. Again, I chanted the 3 refuge, and again he howled after me. Haroo! And it was the same after the 3rd time. His mouth opened wide in order to howl, and then he was cold, not breathing. With his dog's body, he had this close karmic relationship with Buddha. He was eating Buddha food, the source of all existence, the source of life, the light of all life. The 3 treasures, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. You are the master of life. Be in peace, go in peace, practice in peace. Koro heard the 3 refuges just marvelously. He took the 3 refuges just marvelously. How could he so perfectly return to the source, to this truth, the truth of our oneness, spread out wide before us? Nothing is missing. So I'm going to leave it there with Koro, and we will resume Zazen and recite the 4 vows.